Okay, I just got a message saying recording in progress. Okay. In Missouri and the Trans-Mississippi, the guerrilla activity, I believe at this time in 1864 was as high as it probably ever was, culminating with the September 27th Centralia massacre. Oops. Looking at the map of Price's raid very briefly, September 19th, Price entered Missouri. September 27th was Fort Davidson at Pilot Knob. The last week in September, there was a lot of skirmishing and destruction of railroads in Jefferson, Washington, and Franklin counties. And in perhaps the first battle that never happened, Price decided not to attack St. Louis, finding it too heavily fortified. By October 2nd, Marmaduke's division turned west from Washington, Missouri, signaling the Army's intent to march towards Jefferson City. Price's army met only slight resistance as it marched west through Franklin, Gasconade, and Osage counties. Citizens in this area suffered from widespread general mayhem inflicted not only by Price's army, but by bushwhackers and unfortunately sometimes unruly enrolled Missouri militias. By October 5th, all three of Sterling Price's divisions were congregating in the area of Lynn, Missouri. They were bearing down on Jefferson City, only 25 miles away. I asked myself, was this an expedition or a raid? Certainly when it started out, he did have some strategic goals in mind. They were military conquest and political opportunity. Sterling Price wanted to capture St. Louis, one of the nation's largest and most vital industrial centers, which at that time included many individuals, certainly not all, but many who were enjoying unparalleled wartime prosperity. Price wanted to retake Jefferson City, displace federal control of Missouri by installing Confederate governor in exile Thomas Reynolds, along with a cadre of would-be officials to run the government, such as former U.S. Senator Trustin Polk. Price's campaign covered over 1,500 miles, 5 times the distance of General Sherman's march of the same time period. The Federals mobilized massive numbers of troops. Some estimates put it in the 60 to 70,000 range to deal with Price's incursion. These are numbers certainly not indicative of a raid, more like an expedition. However, by the time the events occurred in Jefferson City, the event turned into a raid. Confederate concerns would center on avoiding their pursuers. After Jefferson City, almost any stolen farm wagon was viewed as an achievement. The Army began to take what they needed immediately and to keep on moving. Price's would-be liberation of Missouri lost all sense of direction. The Army was overcome by a general breakdown in discipline. In particular, as the Army approached the Boone's Lick area, the policies of Confederate commanders themselves led to an acceptance of their role as a mere raid. These views permitted the Missouri troops to take extended furloughs and scatter in every direction as they visited family and friends. In conclusion, it began with an expedition, but after St. Louis, actually, it started to take on the characteristics of a raid. After Jefferson City, it was definitely a raid. So if you refer it to as an expedition or a raid, perhaps both viewpoints are correct depending on what point in time you're talking about. Major General William Rosecrans was commander of the Army of the Department of Missouri at this time. As you know, General Rosecrans was a very experienced commander. He prepared Jefferson City for the attack that began on October the 6th. Rosecrans began a concentration of manpower in Jefferson City on September 23rd, when he ordered General Brown and his forces to report to the capital city from Warrensburg. By October 1st, troops were flowing into the city. Soldiers were immediately put to work building fortifications, alongside the local citizenry and even inmates from the state penitentiary. According to the local Jefferson City newspaper, citizen guards were called in a body into active service, and all able-bodied men, white and black, residing in the city, are found in the city, belonging in the neighborhood, are brought in public conveyance, were pressed into service and set to work digging rifle pits and building or completing fortifications. I thought it was interesting that if you were traveling through town on a stagecoach or a steamboat or on the train, they would pull you off of that and put you digging entrenchments. General Rosecrans made several command decisions to counter Price after the events at Pilot Knob. When Rosecrans began to realize the size of Price's forces, one of Rosecrans' first moves was to telegraph Alfred Pleasanton at the fashionable Fifth Avenue Hotel in New York City. Rosecrans' telegraph was very terse and short and to the point. It said, "Come back as soon as possible. There will be a heavy invasion. You will command the cavalry." Signed, William Rosecrans. Rosecrans also convinced Major General Henry Halleck to divert Major General A.J. Smith's 6,000 men to Missouri. That included 4,500 infantry, 1,500 cavalry, and from the 7th Kansas, the 13th Missouri, as well as Merrill's horse. And later, even Malwar's 4,000 infantry and Colonel Winslow's 2,000 cavalry. One other significant command decision made by General Rosecrans was to amalgamate the regular Army volunteers and the Missouri State Militia with provisional forces that included 4,400 enrolled Missouri militia under Brigadier General E.C. Pike, along with 5,000 home guards commanded by Senator B. Gratz Brown, and 5 regiments of 100-day volunteers from Illinois. All of these forces were mobilized to meet Price's invasion. Here is a map that we're going to talk about tonight quite a bit. It is actually it's called a tracing of croquis of Jefferson City, Missouri. This was made in September of 1865. We're going to look at this map in detail tonight. It was compiled in 1865 in September, about 11 months after the events that occurred in October of 64, compiled by Captain William Halleck, I believe is how you pronounce that. He was the chief engineer, Department of Missouri. He labeled 5 areas on this map forts, although they were actually earthen redoubts. Whether they were redoubts or redans, I do not know, but Captain Halleck explained to his commanding officer, whatever they were, it was common to name them forts. So we're going to call them forts in our presentation. This map became known to the general public in 1985 from research conducted at the Military Archives Division of the National Archives by Dino Brugiani, again, the person whose collection is at the Cole County Historical Society. The late Mr. Sam D. Cook from Central Trust Bank in Jefferson City is credited with reprinting the map for enhanced legibility and clarity. The characterization of the map as a croquis is the same as a map Captain Holkey did at Prairie Grove, Arkansas. In 1865, after the war, Captain Halleck went to different locations in the Trans-Mississippi and made similar sketches. We're very, very fortunate to have this map. There are no photographs available of Jefferson City, to my knowledge, at this time, but we do have this map. It's an example of some fortifications reported to have been implemented in the defense of Jefferson City. We have palisades shown, and I apologize, it's a little small. but shown are palisades, an example of palisades such as were found in Atlanta in 1864 at this very same time. They're stakes sticking up out of the ground with sharpened points. The picture looks to be about three or four blocks of Atlanta in 1864. Similar length occurred in Jefferson City, probably about 3 or 4 blocks. We have Cheval de Frise in Jefferson City also. They were mobile devices. When you put multiple of them together, I think it becomes Chevaux de Frise, such as these seen in the lower left on Marietta Street in Atlanta, the same time period. They look primitive and medieval to me. I think they must have been quite effective against cavalry forces. We also had abatis, which are sticks piled up and sharpened stakes. We had breastworks in Jefferson City. They could be earth, stone, or logs. And one last picture in the upper left is Chevaux de Frise. They look quite effective to me. Those types of fortifications were used in Jefferson City by the Federals at this time. We don't have any pictures, but we're very fortunate to have a sketch that was done in this time period. If you look at the sketch, you can see the Missouri State Capitol kind of over on the horizon. It was drawn by one James Gurl at the time, G-U-R-L, I think that's Gurl. It's federal troops throwing breastworks around Jefferson City, drawn on the spot by James Gurl. Indeed, I'm grateful to the Cole County Historical Society for providing this to me. The main line of defense began in front of the Capitol, just south of High Street, and continuing east before crossing High Street, just past the present-day courthouse, thence continuing east to Cherry Street and terminating 1 block south of the Missouri State Penitentiary. Notice that the breastworks seem quite tall. They're shown as taller than the soldiers, so they were at least 6 foot tall, it looks like. We have another sketch showing the armory that existed at that time. You can see the Capitol Dome in the background. Notice again the earthworks in front of the Capitol. As Price approached Lynn and advanced west toward Jefferson City with his 12,000-man army, only about 2,300 battle-ready troops were stationed at the capital city. With direct telegraph lines between the Capitol and St. Louis down, the Army adopted an ingenious system of couriers in North Missouri that dashed between the broken lines. Even so, the dispatches from Jefferson City sometimes had to reach the outside world through circuitous routes, such as that through Chicago. So the line to Kansas City was still up. Presumably it would, telegraph sometimes would get there, travel perhaps between the St. Joseph and Hannibal Railroad in North Missouri and then up to Chicago, somehow or another back to St. Louis. Some of those messages were still getting through on the eve of this invasion. Defenders at Jefferson City believed erroneously that A.J. Smith's army was closing in on the heels of Price. A.J. Smith's army was gathering in St. Louis at Benton Barracks at that time, but they were not able to get to Jefferson City in time to help matters here. Want to talk about the role of Brigadier General Clinton B. Fisk. He was the commander of the District of North Missouri at St. Louis. He was ordered by Rosecrans to reinforce Jefferson City on September 30th with all dispatch. He arrived in Jefferson City the afternoon of the 6th and promptly issued General Order Number 1. The 6th was a day of attack. Fisk got there the same day. He reorganized the defenders into 4 brigades. This reorganization was described by Fisk himself as a defensive ploy calculated to convey to the enemy an exaggerated idea of the real force of the city. I've learned that many times commanders would inflate their troop strength in order to keep the enemy in hopes that the enemy might not attack. There was some of this going on in Jefferson City. We'll talk more about that later. Experienced soldiers reported Fisk as being in the saddle constantly, turning up unexpectedly at various points in the line. He was described as being cool under fire and possessing a conduct calculated to inspire confidence and courage among his men. Fisk outranked General Brown, so as soon as Fisk came on site here on the 6th, he was in charge. Although Fisk commanded upwards of 6,500 men, guerrilla activity in his district was so high, Fisk was reluctant to leave his district completely unprotected. Even more problematically, his command included many enrolled Missouri militia, hundreds of whom were reluctant to deploy, either due to fear or simply our sympathy to the Southern cause. Read maybe some Pawpaw militias were serving under General Fisk. Against such difficulties, Fisk succeeded in mustering only about 1,800 men from the St. Joseph district to report to Jefferson City. Unfortunately, of the 1,800, upwards of 1,000 had never been drilled as much as 1 hour. Brigadier General Edward Brown was the commander of the District of Central Missouri at Warrensburg. Brown came to Jefferson City, was ordered to Jefferson City. He enlisted all able-bodied residents of Jefferson City to build reinforcements. This included soldiers, militia, civilians, prison inmates, and refugees. In a week's time, existing trenches were fortified on the east and west ends of town. New fortifications were added on the south end, amounting to 3 miles, anchored by 5 forts. At one time, they had as many from 1,000 or 2,000 or even 3,000 soldiers and civilians digging entrenchments. However, they only had 800 shovels available. So I guess the rest were cutting brush, or I'm not sure what they were doing. Edward Brown. Colonel Francis W. Hickok was the state senator from Montauk County and commander of the 43rd Enrolled Missouri Militia. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of Colonel Hickok. He supervised construction of Jefferson City's defenses and preparation of Price's expected attack. General Brown, the overall commander, knew he had to abandon Fremont's original, more expansive, but unfinished works on the Swifts Hill Ridge, i.e. the south end of Jefferson Street, in favor of a short line, and Hickok directly supervised its labor and construction. In 1861, when Fremont was in charge, he originally built some fortifications. They started them. They were way too expansive. General Brown brought those back into what came to be known as the High Street Line. We're going to look at a map of the map you see in red. I've outlined the defenses that were in the fortifications that were put up. Note that it's 2 miles from the left side to the right side of the map. Note that the Missouri River, of course, is on top. I'm going to show some current institutions and buildings so that you can begin to get a feel for what overlaid this map. First of all, we're going to have the highways in the upper left-hand corners where the bridge is that comes across the Missouri River. I'm sure most of you all are familiar with that. The east-west highway is Highway 50 and Highway 63. Local people in Jefferson City have always referred that to the expressway. On the upper left-hand corner, if you can see it, we have where the bridge is over the Missouri River. It comes right into an area known as College Hill. We have the new gleaming Missouri State Capitol. And if you can see it, I hope, apologize if they're a bit small. That's the Missouri State Penitentiary in the kind of the upper right-hand part. I'm showing you these institutions and so forth so you can begin to get an idea where these fortifications existed in 1864. And of course, there's the governor's mansion. That's a 1871 governor's mansion, so that is not period correct. However, the two characters there are period correct. On the left, that would be the Honorable G. Gratz Brown, who was commanding home guards in St. Louis at this time. On the right, that is a somewhat notable character of, I believe that's George Maddox, the Confederate irregular in Missouri. He's probably carrying a Navy Colt. That of course is Mr. Roger Baker. At the bottom on the south side, if many of you all might be familiar with Central Dairy. So those are some institutions, and right kind of in the middle is High Street. So these are how the fortifications existed in 1864 in relation to some modern buildings and so forth. We're going to take a look at the defenses. First of all, we have the period correct Capitol in 1864. We have the Armory, which was right next to the Capitol, right across from the, I believe it's St. Peter's Church and School. That's what Price and the Confederates wanted, was to seize the Armory, of course, and the Capitol. I don't know how much armaments, how many armaments were in the Armory. I think when the war started, there was a few items left over from the war with Mexico, but I don't know how heavily the Armory was stocked by 1864. The picture certainly shows a lot of cannons around it. The upper right-hand corner, we have what's a fort called General Miners Hill Fort. We have something called the East Fort, which was at Cherry Street and High Street. Fort number 3 was called Miller's Hill Fort. If you're native Jeffersonian, you might know that area as Hobo Hill. It's the area of Simonson 9th grade center. Down on Dunklin Street, where we have there's a warehouse there now, a Prairie Farms warehouse. And over on the west side, we have the College Hill Fort. That's where the water tower is currently. We have the abatis, and we have the palisades running probably 3 or 4 blocks surrounding the Capitol complex. So you can begin to see that the capital city, General Brown, they had well fortified capital city. I'm showing artillery at the Miners Fort as well as the East Fort. I've tried to document the type of artillery that was at each one. At the East Fort, I found out those were a battery of mountain howitzers. At the Miller's Hill Fort was fortified. The Union Hill Battery is the current location of Jefferson City Senior High School. There was artillery there. And I documented that there was artillery at the College Hill Fort. And of course, there was artillery surrounding the Capitol building. Over here on the right side of your screen, notice Thurber's battery of 3-inch guns of the 2nd Missouri Light Artillery. They were wheeled into place during action on the second day of fighting on the 7th of October. They were in the location of what I believe was the Immaculate Conception Church on McCarty Street, I believe was their location, right at the end of something called the Bolton Road that we're going to talk a lot about here in the next part of the presentation. Thurber's 3-inch guns were stationed there. I'm showing a Confederate gun that is dismounted. I'm not trying to be funny. That's what happened. The official records indicate that from a wooded heights on the left of the fairground, a rebel battery opened fire. This spot marks the furthest area of penetration by the Confederates. And that was, even then, was not even in the city limits, but now it is in an area known as Morrow Drive. Counter battery fire dismounted one of Captain William Huey's cannons, which were a 2-gun battery of James rifles, which were later captured at the second day's fighting at Independence. So there's Jefferson City. That's how it was fortified. The cannon fire was very effective during this 2-day engagement. The Union cannon fire was most effective. We're now going to look I want to jump ahead a little bit. The program's about half over. I'm running out of time already, but I want to tell you what happened in this engagement. Going back to the map, the railroads, you see these appearing on the top of your screen. The railroads line were cut off both to the east and the west. The Confederates had occupied the high ground. These contour elevations you can see on this map, the way they mark the hills is where the darker lines are on the map. Jefferson City is, as the Capitol, is pretty much in a bowl. It sits down where the Capitol Dome is. The Capitol complex is surrounded by hills on just about all sides. The Confederates advanced to a position where they occupied those hills. Fagan on the right, we had Shelby and Jeff Thompson's division, some 2,000 soldiers were blocking off the left side. All of the high points around the were occupied by Confederates, and essentially in actuality, the Union soldiers, the Federals, were surrounded. There's going to end up being about 7,000 Federal troops, probably about 4,000 effectives, about 7,000 in all, surrounded by some 12,000 Confederates, maybe 8,000 effectives. And very interesting, down in the lower left, you're going to see something called the Dooley Home. I hope we have time tonight to talk about that. It, I believe, had some significance in what occurred. Brigadier General McNeil was commander of the District of Rolla. With the telegraph line severed, McNeil correctly guessed on October 3rd that Price was headed towards Jefferson City, and he determined upon his own volition to bring as many troops as possible to the relief of Jefferson City. Beginning on the morning of the 4th, McNeil was a senior commander. He led his and Sanborn's cavalry brigades, totaling 2,400 men, 8 pieces of artillery, and a large collection of supply wagons. I've forgotten how many, but he led them on a 70-mile forced march from Rolla through rain and mud, arriving at the Capitol in the afternoon of the 5th. He made that 70-mile force. He and Sanborn made that 70-mile forced march in 36 hours, which was a very daring move on his part. When he got here, he was posted to the western edge of the city's defenses. Brigadier General McNeil. Sanborn was along with him. Sanborn was an experienced infantry officer who commanded a division at Vicksburg. Although Price's Missouri offensive was Sanborn's first time commanding a large cavalry force in the field. He reached Jefferson City the afternoon of the 5th after a forced march of 70 miles through rain and mud. As early as September 18th, Sanborn captured the personal correspondence of several Confederates in Shelby's division, and all predicted that Price would march on Jefferson City. So he had the troops of Price's army writing letters and correspondence back home to their wives and girlfriends and so forth, announcing where they were headed and what they were doing, and that information was captured by Sanborn. They knew that they were coming to Jefferson City. Fighting around Jefferson City would commence around 11 o'clock on the 6th. Defenses had been prepared. McNeil and Sanborn's timely arrival had boosted the garrison to 4,500 battle-ready troops. Forward elements like 1,500 cavalry troops of the federal forces were in place to contest Price's crossing anywhere along an 8-mile stretch of the Osage River. Fighting in Jefferson City would prove to be pivotal. It demonstrated what largely less experienced generals and ill-prepared militia could do with their backs to the wall. But first, the Confederates would have to destroy the railroad bridge over the Osage. The Osage River Railroad Bridge, 6 spans, was the largest railroad structure in Missouri, not counting the railroad over the Mississippi. After arriving in Westphalia on the 5th, Shelby ordered Shanks and a brigade to go 10 miles north and destroy the bridge near the mouth of the Osage River. Burning the bridge would prevent any large-scale Yankee escape from Jefferson City. Unfortunately for the Confederates, the 18-hour delay permitted the Union position to grow stronger by the hour. Unfortunately for the Federals, the militiamen guarding the bridge neglected to open the drawbridge, which would have prevented the rebels from crossing. So you see that picture of the modern day, it was just taken last week. You've got some kind of a drawbridge there where, where ships can go underneath it. They had the same type of structure in 1864 where steamboats could go underneath it. There's a report that the Federals simply forgot to open that up. I need to research that a little further. But anyway, Colonel Shanks burned this bridge, destroying any means of escape by railroad by the Federal troops. They also, there was a bridge over the Moro River. This, of course, is a modern steel truss railroad bridge, but it was a wooden bridge at the same place in 1864 in an apparent panic or from a simple breakdown of communications. Union forces burned the railroad bridge over the Moro. This was completely unnecessary as the bridge was safely behind Union lines. We're going to look at the area of operations. Notice how appearing at the top of the screen is the map that we've looked at previously. That's Jefferson City, but the area of operations was much larger than that, bound by the Osage River. In the middle of your screen, you see the Moro River. Notice how there's a north branch of the Moro River as well as a south branch of the Moro River. That's something that sometimes historians get confused about, but that's the Moro River, and it's bound, it's bound on the north by the, of course, the Missouri River. This is an area of some 52 miles where the Confederates were operating beginning on the 6th and continuing on the 7th, from the Osage River Railroad Bridge at Osage City in the east to Cole Junction on the west, from Jefferson City on the north to Bolton's Ford south of modern-day Wardsville, and east to Bodie Ferry at Prince's Ford on the Osage. General Brown would be commanding Federal forces on the 6th in the field. Sanborn would assume those duties on the 7th. A lot of the fighting took place between these two homes. I tried to show the location. The top was known as the Kelly Bolton home, was the home of the family of Dr. William Bolton. It is on Greenberry Road. The bottom home is the Colonel Lewis Bolton home. It was built in 1833. I tried to show, if you see the arrow, it goes over to the Osage River. 7 miles between these two homes, and a lot of the fighting took place. The yellow represents the area of Confederate advances beginning on the 6th. They advanced to a point midway between these two homes. The disposition of the Confederates on October the 6th, the day of the attack. By October 5th, Price had reconstituted his multiple axes of attack by massing his 12,000-man army into a single axis, constituted first in the vicinity of Lynn, then marching in a cold and driving rain to Westphalia. The same cold and driving rain that fell on McNeil and Sanborn coming from Rolla. Joe Shelby and his experienced and battle-hardened cavalry division would launch the attack on Jefferson City. In perhaps a testament to security measures imposed by General Brown, Confederate scouts and spies appear not to have been effective. And by sunrise on the 6th, the day of attack, Joe Shelby had quote, very little sense of what actually lay in front of him. That coming from Professor Sinisi. Many Confederates expected a quick and easy victory, followed by a triumphal march into the capital city. You all have heard of John Newman Edwards as a testament to his intellectual.
Call me back. I'm watching something on TV.
Okay, I'll call you back.
As a testament to John, these are my words, incidentally, as a testament to his intellectual dishonesty, the scribe, John Newman Edwards, had characterized the defenders of Jefferson City as, quote, militia utterly worthless for sober fighting. This statement by Edwards came even after Price's disastrous defeat at Pilot Knob, which had been defended in no small part by soldiers of the Missouri militia. The picture you see of Joe Shelby, incidentally, was taken, I believe, in the Boone's Lick just a couple of weeks after the events in Jefferson City. I believe that's October of 1864, picture of General Shelby. Again, looking at the Confederate advance in yellow over the Osage River. They begin their attack around 11 o'clock Thursday, October the 6th. The first force across was Frank Gordon's 5th Missouri Cavalry Regiment, came across at Castle Rock, followed by Colonel Shanks' Iron Brigade at Prince's Ford. And while the fighting was occurring there, Elliott's 5th Missouri Cavalry managed to basically sneak across at Bolton's Ferry and come up the Bolton Road. Remaining in reserve for reasons that are unexplained, Jackman's brigade of Shelby's division did not cross at that time. And what happened if Confederates came across the Osage River and they immediately ran into very stiff resistance under the command of this quite capable commander, Colonel John Finis Phillips, commander of the 7th Missouri State Militia. He commanded a mixed force of 1,500 MSM cavalry guarding the 6-mile stretch of the Osage River. He fought superior forces of Shelby on the afternoon of the 6th and held them in check between the Osage and the Moro. Colonel Phillips was a native of Boone County, born at what I believe is pronounced Thrall's Prairie, I think is an area out by Rocheport, I'm not sure. He attended the University of Missouri. He practiced law at Georgetown. He got his degree in Kentucky, but he practiced law in Missouri before the war. He became a member of Congress and appellate judge after the war. He's buried in Kansas City. Notable combat during this period, he was placed in command 2 weeks after Jefferson City. He went with Pleasanton towards Westport, and he was placed in command of a brigade and ordered to follow the lead of Colonel Edward Winslow to lead the second battle of Byram's Ford, when Phillips' superior, General Brown, along with Colonel McFerrin, was placed under arrest on October 23rd by Major General Pleasanton for not promptly attacking Byram's Ford. And we know those were trumped up charges, but at any rate, Colonel Phillips was put in command there. His brigade, Phillips' brigade, was the first to overtake and attack Price's army at Mine Creek, Kansas, where Phillips was wounded in the eye. As far as his accolades, the historian Mark Louse states that even though Phillips entered the war as a Democrat and a conservative, quote, he became one of the tried and true federal militia officers of the war. John Phillips from Boone County. Colonel Shanks of the Confederates was severely wounded crossing the Osage on the 6th. I won't read a whole lot about that, but he was wounded so badly that the Confederates had to leave him behind. We don't know the eventual outcome of Colonel Shanks, but he never fought again. Whether he died and was buried in the field, or whether we just don't know what happened to him, but that's Colonel David Shanks. He was one of the most capable commanders in Price's army. As far as the fighting on the 6th, officers on both sides reported an intensity of conflict that simply belied the small numbers of the officially acknowledged casualties. Having found Jefferson City considerably more fortified than expected, fighting the next day, Friday the 7th, found the Confederates advancing cautiously and solely for the purposes of developing the enemy and driving their pickets across the Morro and into the city's line of entrenchments. In other words, the Confederates found so much resistance, they decided to push them back and gain a position where overlooking Jefferson City and decide what their next move was. Shelby marched in an arc and advanced towards the city along a route that is all likelihood was the Tuscumbia Road, today's Tanner Bridge Road. Aside from occasional federal cannon shell thrown at his troopers, Shelby's forces scarcely came under fire all day. That would be the second day's fighting, the 7th. After Shanks was dismounted, Shelby's division, they went into Jefferson City down what today is known as Tanner Bridge Road. At least that's my opinion, the route they took. Price rotated Fagan's division to the front, and they proceeded down the Bolton Road, having posted Wright's cavalry of Slimmen's brigade in the lead. Fagan was on the march October 7th. He was on the march by 6 a.m. He went up the Bolton Road in green. Marmaduke's division continued to serve as the rear guard. It's likely they would still have been leery of A.J. Smith's army. They didn't know where Smith's army was. They were afraid they were on the rear. Shelby crosses the Morro on the morning of the 7th. There we have the Tuscumbia Road where Shelby went in. There's the Russellville Road appearing on your screen. This is the Bolton Road that goes into modern day Morro Drive. Joe Shelby mounted up his most veteran forces, proceeded down Tanner Bridge Road, and it looks like this in 2021, down Tanner Bridge Road. He's going to go around the west side of Jefferson City. He's going to go down Tanner Bridge Road. There's what the Morro River looks like. In a normal, it's not particularly high in that area. As you get closer to the Missouri River, the Morro and the Osage become much deeper and much wider. Shelby would have went down Tanner Bridge Road, crossed in front of today's Knights of Columbus, came to an area right behind and a little past today's Army Reserve Center at the top of Tanner Bridge Road. Shelby's going to cross the Morro, and from an area near modern day Mesa Avenue comes into view of the Union Hill Battery, which was occupied the site of the current Jefferson City Public High School. The legendary Pete Atkins football stadium is right down there. At this point, Shelby's probably not going to expose his whole division because they're pretty close. They're about a quarter of a mile, I believe. But that's going to be their first visual of the Union defenses. It was right there at Jefferson, where Jefferson City High School is now. It's called the Union Hill Battery. Shelby reaches the end of modern day Tanner Bridge Road, goes on past the American Legion. The area where Capital Region Medical Center is now is known as Koch's. It's either Coaches or Koch's Hill. That's the most prominent area. And it comes out, the Tuscumbia Road joined Jefferson Street at an area now known as Swift's Highway. The Villa Panorama is in the 1300 blocks of Swift's Highway. It offers the most panoramic view of the Capitol complex. That's where the Confederates are going to be. At some point, Price ordered Shelby to send a detachment of 100 men to destroy railroad facilities in the area of Cole Junction. They would have went down Boonville Road, came out at Cole Junction, the area of Grays Creek, and burnt the railroad bridge, as you see in the area of the railroad on the right. That's at Cole Junction. One thing that the Rebs did a really good job of in this expedition was tearing up railroads. There was, during the course of October, the Department of Missouri reported mobilizing 24,000 enrolled Missouri militia, almost all of whom were put to work repairing the Iron Mountain Railroad, the Pacific Railroad, and the southwest branch of the Pacific Railroad going to Rolla. Fighting in the Morro Bottoms on the 7th began at 7 a.m. at the James Gordon Farm, about 5 miles south of Jefferson City. Commanders that day would pit 2 Virginians against each other. Colonel Joseph Gravely of the 8th Missouri State Militia was in charge of the forces in the Morro Bottom. His orders were to hold them off as long as you can and fall back slowly. Brigadier General Cabell commanded the Arkansas Brigade going up the Bolton Road. So we had 2 Virginians facing off against each other first thing on the morning of the 7th. That's on a Friday. Also on that day saw Arkansans fighting Arkansans. Colonel John Phelps, born at Springfield, Missouri, commanded the 2nd Arkansas Union Forces. Major General James Fagan was a Kentuckian. He commanded the Arkansas forces doing the fighting up the Bolton Road that day. Fagan, I believe, was later captured at Mine Creek. Oh, I'm going to skip over this. Just tells how the fighting, it's not a very good slide. I apologize. But basically, the federal forces under the command of Colonel Gravely fought very exquisitely against holding off the Confederate forces. It was a very hard fought. There was numerous casualties.
Bill, let me interrupt just a second. Bill,
Sure, Harold.
you're under no time constraints, so take all the time you want.
Well, okay, all right. Thank you. I am getting kind of towards the end. I didn't want to go over an hour, but we may go over just a little bit.
That's fine.
Thank you, Harold. All right. Colonel Gravely stationed his back to fighting the morning of the 7th in the Morro Bottoms. When you hear the historians describe fighting in the Morro Bottoms this time period, this is what they're talking about. Colonel Gravely of the 8th Missouri State Militia stationed his regiment 1 squadron in the rear of each other at strategic intervals along the Bolton Ferry Road. Stationed at James Gordon Farm, Captain William Human's company was the first to be hit. So they stationed 1 squadron at a time on each side of the road at strategic intervals. The first squadron would hold them off as long as they could. They would fall back behind the squadron behind them. They would reload while the new squadron unloaded their weapons, fired their weapons. So it was a strategic withdrawal, I will call it, all the way back to the Morro River at the Dixon Plantation. And there was another company there of Major William Plum's detachment of 6th Missouri State Militia covering the ford. As the 8th withdrew back towards the ford, they were covered by Lieutenant James Murphy of the 6th Militia, thus allowing the 8th to withdraw safely. That became known as the Guns of Fort Murphy. As they unleashed an enfilade fire, the 8th reformed north of the ford to protect Plum's men as they, in turn, crossed back over. In this manner, both regiments, each covering the other, safely withdrew north of the Morro Ford, located at the end of today's Greenberry Road. So now at this point, by about 11 o'clock Friday morning, the Confederates have driven the Union forces back completely over the Morro. And fighting on the 7th saw the Confederates completely encircle Jefferson City at various points, overlooking federal entrenchments and fortifications. That night saw General Price and others taking quarter at the Wallendorf Farm in Frog Hollow. So the yellow shows the area of Confederate advancements. Again, down the Bolton Road and the what today's Tanner Bridge Road, known at that time as Tuscumbia Road. We're going to have some houses here. The Monaco home on Morrow Drive figured into this fighting. The Dooley home in particular, and the southwest part of Jefferson City figured into this fighting. And then the Wallendorf home, the 1830s walnut and oak dog trot log cabin has been completely restored. Historians and amateur Civil War buffs and the general public should be very grateful to the Missouri Farm Bureau. It's on their property, and they have restored that to its original condition. It's called the Wallendorf home. I encourage you to go see it there in Jefferson City. But the Monaco home on 1122 Morrow Drive, there was a widow's walk at the top of the home, and it's believed to have served as an observation post to the fighting occurring on October 7th in the Morrow Bottoms and along the Bolton Road approach to the capital city. Although it cannot be stated with certainty, it is likely that Generals Fisk and Sanborn observed the battle from this location, as both generals were reported as being in the field that day. A tunnel once led from the basement in an easterly direction towards the Morrow River. The tunnel's exact purpose cannot be stated with certainty. However, rich oral tradition in Jefferson City holds that the tunnel may have been a part of the Underground Railroad. Notice, if you would, that giant, beautiful northern catalpa tree in the front yard of the Monaco home. I don't know if that tree's the largest catalpa tree I've ever seen. If it wasn't there at the time of this battle, perhaps his father was, but it's just a beautiful place. If you see it it's on Morrow Drive in Jefferson City, the Monaco home. Also, not figuring a part of the battle, but we have the Mosby Parsons home in Jefferson City. It's just off of Capitol Avenue. His father, Gustavus Parsons, was home. I believe it was on Jefferson Street at that time. It was used as a Confederate hospital. However, it's no longer standing. I just wanted to show a quick picture of this home that's in need of restoration, Mosby Parsons home on the Capitol, just off Capitol Avenue. The G.H. Dooley home, I'm trying to show it's in the southwest part of Jefferson City. This is a beautiful home. This time of year, at Christmas time, it's beautifully decorated. You can see it as soon as you come across the Missouri River Bridge into Jefferson City. The house was built in 1846. It's currently home of the 5th generation Dooley family. During the Civil War, General Fremont set up his encampment in and around this vicinity. Camp Lily, which was Fremont's daughter, named after her, by most accounts, Camp Lily was considered the highest point in the immediate area. A local legend states that once, when Confederate troops were in the area, read this October 1864, Union soldiers marched around the house, leaving through the front door to give the Confederate troops the impression that there were many more troops than actually existed on the hill guarding the city. I want to come back to that in just a moment. As fighting ended around 1 o'clock the afternoon of the 7th, Thompson and his men were within sight of Jefferson City. Basically, the Confederates had Jefferson City surrounding. There's all sorts of records in the official statements and the official records to verify that. What were the Federals thinking at that point in time? They were starting to be very concerned. Justice Brown had fought on Thursday. Sanborn had fought on Friday. General McNeil was anticipating Saturday, and his men labored industrial all night Friday night to prepare for what they thought would be a certain onslaught Saturday morning. General Fisk managed to get a telegram through to Rosecrans Friday evening, which Fisk thought might be his very last. The ball is opening earnestly, Fisk stated. What were the Confederates thinking Friday afternoon? By now, Price had received positive confirmation that McNeil and Sanborn had joined the garrison in Jefferson City. Price had received quote unquote positive information. It turned out that was incorrect, that he had received what he considered to be positive information that the enemy was 12,000 strong in the city with 3,000 more on the opposite bank of the river. So Price thought there were 15,000 guarding the city, when in reality there were about 7,000. In reality, only about 4,000 of them were effectives. Price, with this information, Price decided to convene a conference of his generals at the cabin at the cabin home in the vicinity of Frog Hollows, southwest of Jefferson City. One more time, we look at the map. The yellow representing Confederates had Jefferson City completely surrounded. Notice the Dooley home down in the left-hand corner. Notice the terrain, the topography. The Dooley home itself is on a hill. It is surrounded by a creek and on two sides, that being Wares Creek. Notice the position of the Confederates in the yellow. It is entirely possible that Union soldiers marched through the creek bottom, came up to the Dooley home, marched around or through the Dooley home, back down to the next creek bottom, circled around the hill, came back up and repeated that again, thus deceiving the Confederates into thinking there were many more troops than what there actually were. That is not in any official description or record, that incident. It is the Dooley family has lived in that, occupied that home for 5 generations. It is their oral history that is what occurred in their home. I personally have no reason to doubt that and every reason to think it probably occurred. This is the Wallendorf home. Price really did sleep there. Old Pap really did sleep there Friday the 7th. They ate the Wallendorf family out of house and home. To pay for it, Price left Mr. Wallendorf $28 in worthless Confederate script. I have one question. There you see, where was Price's supply train and accompanying horses, mules, and cattle during this time? There's nothing in the record where they were. They numbered in the hundreds, if not thousands. That's not an actual picture of them, but that's what it must have looked like. Nothing addresses this question, seems to have been written in reports or descriptions. It's most likely these resources did not approach the capital city. Rather, they were diverted towards modern-day Wardsville and proceeded in a westerly direction towards Russellville. Forgive me, Harold, this next section is speculation, and I'm going to skip through it. We simply don't have the time. I did want to talk about this. The question is all among historians and people who are interested in this subject matter: how far down Morrill Drive did the Confederates actually advance? Here's a description. Was placed a marker that was placed in 1933 by the Daughters of the Confederacy, the Winnie Davis chapter. It marks the location. Deciding against attack, the Confederate Army under General Sterling Price turned from Jefferson City October 7th, 1864. That marker was placed at this location at Morrill Drive and Huff Park Road. We have rebel cannon fire from the official record. We have rebel cannon fire coming from the fairgrounds, what was in the fairgrounds by the old Morrill Heights School. And there was the original marker placed by the Daughters of the Confederacy, some 3/4 of a mile away. So we don't know. It's a matter of, I suppose, discussion, just exactly how far the Confederates did advance. In concluding my my presentation tonight, I have listed the battle casualties as reported in the Jefferson City newspaper 1 week later. I believe it was October 15th, 1864. I don't expect you can read these casualties But I would note you can probably see the rebel wounded there on the right towards the bottom. It just certainly is not very many. The reported casualty list for the Morrill Bottoms fighting is simply problematic. Officers on both sides grossly minimized and vaguely reported their own casualties while exaggerating those inflicted on the enemy. Citizens in the area reported burying dead soldiers, likely not counted in official reports. And I'm not talking about mass graves, but I'm talking about 1 and 2 bodies here and there. Reported disappearances or desertions likely masked more serious casualties. You had a muster call the next day and someone wasn't there, they would jot it down or assume that you skedaddled or something, but in reality, you might have been wounded or even dead. Confederates especially would seem to be underreported, given how well the Federals were entrenched. Nevertheless, the Missouri State Times reported the following list of casualties. I would note on the left-hand column down at the very bottom, 2 up from the very bottom is Christian Weiss, a private, Company I, the 45th Missouri Volunteers, had a severe wound to his right shoulder. That was an ancestor of Andy Papin that's on our on this call tonight. I would notice 6 up from the bottom on the left-hand side, James Vaughn. Well, I do not know James Vaughn, and my last name is Voight, not Vaughn. But James Vaughn was wounded in the neck, and he was a private in the 43rd Enrolled Missouri Militia. That was Colonel Hancock's unit out of Montauk County. Through my research and this project, I have discovered that I had a grandfather, a great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Nelson Shadwick, who I always knew that, but I did not know that he was on the 1862 muster roll of the 43rd militia in California, Missouri. I'm trying to find out if he was present in this action in October of '64. That's the casualty list. I'd like to close my presentation tonight with a poem. It's a poem to the unknown soldier. I do not know your name, although you were a mother's son. She must have waited patiently for your safe return. A prayer of thanks, I say, for you and the mother who lost a son, and for the rights I have that your sacrifice won. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my program tonight. So I did it in an hour and 10 minutes, Harold.
That's good. Bill, thank you very much.
Most welcome.
This was very good, very informative. Are there any questions or comments that anybody would like to toss out there?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the the presentation and the graphics. I'd say it was some of the best I've seen.
Yeah, Dave, I think it's a rival to your presentations.
Well, I have to say, I know there's some retired academians and educators in our group, and I hope I did not disappoint. I'd also like to say I've been married 8 years now, and my wife, bless her heart, she had never seen me do a serious research project, and I have been at this the better part of all summer long and into the fall, and she will be glad that I have concluded and can kind of get back to doing some yard work.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Harold? This is Ralph.
Any
Can you
other-
hear me?
Oh, Ralph, yeah.
We've got 3 programs that are available for anyone who wants to give a presentation next year in February, in April, or in May. So if you'd like to reserve one of those dates for a program, whether you've got it written up yet or not, but February, April, and May. Check your calendars. And contact
So this
Harold
is an
if you're-
opportunity.
Yeah.
You got my email address. Just send me an email, what you'd like to do, when you'd like to do it. And we will certainly let you do it. Anything else?
Hey, Bill, kind of just real quick here, thanks for the shout out to my ancestor that he was listed as being, Christian Weiss was listed as being wounded severely in the right shoulder. He died a week later in the hospital here in Jeff City and is buried up around Sandy Hook, where the family is from. His two younger brothers were both in the garrison at Pilot Knob, and both were wounded, although both survived, in the retreat from Pilot Knob. So the Weiss family, Price's raid was hard on the Weiss family in late 1864.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me, the local connections. One of the reasons that I've started my study of Civil War, and I'm going to kind of stick with Missouri for now, and maybe move into the Trans-Mississippi and get a good grasp on all of that before I branch out to Gettysburg and Shiloh and so forth.
I thought it was interesting in that newspaper article that you and I had talked about that listed all the casualties, that another member of that same unit was a neighbor of my family's, a neighbor to their farm. And he's another Swiss immigrant named Emmanuel Kibley. And they list him as being wounded as an ankle sprain, but he died of that wound several months later. So he obviously, I think he had a little bit more than just an ankle sprain, but
Yeah.
But that's how it was listed, which I found interesting as well.
Yeah, that was a very good, that was October 15th, 1864, Jefferson City Times newspaper. A very extensive coverage of that event, as you might expect. But
Yeah.
I also was surprised to find the accuracy with which that was reported. I didn't find anything in that newspaper article that would go against now 160 years later what we know to be the record. That was a surprisingly good newspaper article.
I agree completely. Good stuff.
Okay, well, I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. I'll maybe do another one next year, maybe not be quite this long.
Oh,
Thank
we
you.
are under no time,
Very good. Very good.
time restrictions.
Well,
Okay.
I really felt that there's even a lot of material, and I did not hardly scratch the surface on. For example, I was only down at the State Historical Society just a few hours. I'm sure there's all sorts of resources I could draw in. There's lots of details about Jefferson City events that not the least of which is the artifactual record around there. There's many people who have discovered artifacts over the years. It's just a lot deeper than even what I explored so far.
Bill, thank you very much.
Okay, Harold, we'll see
job.
you Wednesday
Thank
morning.
you.
Harold.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Recently I had a request that we could spend a little more time at our meetings and to kind of add a little more to them. Bill, if you would unshare your screen.
Okay, we'll do that right there.
Thank you.
Good, okay.
So I asked Dave if he would take a few minutes. He has a extensive collection of things he's dug up out of the ground on battlefields. If he would select an item and give a little bit of time and presentation to what the item is and a little bit about it and maybe how he found it and all that kind of stuff. So Dave, you can go ahead and share a screen and do whatever you're going to do.
All righty. Yeah, let's see here. I'm gonna have to.
Click on slideshow.
Yeah, I'm trying to, the Zoom screen is sitting over top of that though. Let's see here. Here we go.
There you go.
All right. Okay, what we're gonna talk about is this very, very long thing. Does anybody know what it is?
It's a picket pin.
Yes, sir. That's exactly what it is. So we're going to talk a little bit about picket pins and things that connected to picket pins and a little bit about picket pins through time. Here's the picket pin. It is, 12 to 13 inches long. If you'll notice, it has this is a federal picket pin, I might point out, and it has a very distinct design to it in terms of its thickness in certain places and so on. On the end of it is this sort of strange, I guess, S loop that the line that connected to the horse was connected to this. And it probably looks like something like this. This was a special rope that was part of cavalry. Every cavalryman had to carry this rope and a picket pin for his horse. The rope, which was referred to in the ORs as a lariat, was 30 feet long. And at the end of it, of course, was the horse. So this would be the connection to the horse, 30 feet of rope over to the picket pin. Now, 30 feet, first of all, the horse had to be trained not to get tangled up in this rope. And that would require some training on the part of the cavalryman with his horse. The other thing is 30 feet, if you put 30 feet of rope out there, that's of course, a radius, and that would be a circular diameter of 60 feet. And so what would happen, what obviously happened was if you had 16 troopers with their horses, that would take up about an acre of real estate just to feed the horses on picket pins. So if you think about the number of cavalrymen, you know, the be huge amounts of area that would be required to put horses on picket pins. So the way it was initially solved was you shortened the length of the lariat down to something that was reasonable and allowed more horses to be pinned. This is what the hobble looks like on the horse. It's a single hobble, and that's what the lariat was connected to. And there is a real problem for the cavalryman reenactor. There is nothing in the ORs that says where or how these lariats and picket pins were placed on the saddle or around the saddle. And that kind of becomes a problem. I'll also point out to you the saddle blanket, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But there seems to be two configurations that are currently used by reenactors. One is the long coiled rope that sits at the rear of the saddle. The other one is a circular connection for that particular device. Now, the actual pickup pins themselves, as with many things between US and CS, the CS picket pin was very, very simple compared with the kind of beautifully forged picket pins of the US. And that seems to hold true for a lot of other things. One of the other things that that all of these cavalrymen had to carry was a watering bit, and that essentially was a bit that was connected in the middle and allowed horses to drink. There is a one below that you can see, which actually had hand connection, so you would lead the horse to water and hope that he would drink. Now, by 1864, the adjutant records indicated that picket pins were no longer in use. The number of picket pins that were recorded in the quarterly adjutant reports fell rather dramatically through 1864. And apparently, because of the nature of the lariat and the lariat distances, there was a system that went to what's called long line connectors, where you would hammer these things into trees, connect a line in between the two connectors, and you would attach your horses to that line, and then feed would be brought in and laid before the horses so they could eat. So the most ideal situation would be horses in a long line and next to a hay field, and soldiers would just go out there, grab the hay up, and lay it in front of their horses to eat. The picture shows a CS long line connector, and it is a very simple forged item. Picket pins stayed with us probably through the First World War. This is a saddle configuration for a World War I cavalryman. And if you'll notice right over here, we're going to blow that part of it picture up again. And you can see here's the lariat. And this little device right in here is a carrier for the picket pin, and another device, which I don't really know what it was used for, but there was some sort of a little hammer, and perhaps this is a hoof cleaning device, but they both went inside this little packet. You can see that the picket pin has changed, although its basic design is somewhat the same. But it had changed over that time period. The last thing I want to talk about is something I learned in just doing some brief studies on these picket pins, that the amount of stuff that had to be attached to the McClellan saddle by these troopers was excessive. And a horse really didn't last much more than about 3 days before it had to be rested. And so they did everything they could to lighten the load on the horse. So such things as the lariats, to some extent weren't used. Picket pins were abandoned by 1864. But the interesting thing that I found was that one of the things that they had to carry was obviously a night blanket and a half of a pup tent, and they also had to carry a saddle blanket. Well, one of the things that they came up with was just to abandon the saddle blanket. And so they, under the saddle, between the saddle and the horse, they put their shelter half and their bedroll for the night. And that became the saddle blanket. They also attached the saddle differently around the front of the horse and didn't use a big girth strap underneath the saddle, which again lightened up the situation. But they were required to carry all these things, and they just abandoned them for making the system lighter. And I guess that's about all that I can tell you about picket pins. Now, the big question is, often I get is, what is it worth? And the answer is, here's a recent sale in Virginia of this particular picket pin, and it was $160. Generally, picket pins run from about $200 to about $400, depending upon what's left on the picket pin and its location, where it was found, and so on. Mine cost $15 after I lowered the price from $20 at a flea market in Iowa. And mine is probably, I'm thinking Indian Wars rather than Civil War. It still had some of the japanning on it, which was something that they were trying to preserve the iron. So that's about it. And thank you for watching.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, anything else to bring before the group?
News.
Yeah. People pay up.
I paid.
Well, I haven't.
Send those suckers in.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ring off here.
Anything else?
What's that blue thing behind David? Is that a Civil War
That's just
thing?
that's the first screen of the presentation.
Okay, that's not a
And
microscopic.
Let me show you something. Here is a watering